I didn't argue, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't remind her whose name was on the deed. When my daughter asked me for $500,000 for her wedding and then said very calmly, "Mom, you owe me that much," I listened. I looked at her and I said, "All right." 1 week later, I sold the house, and I left without saying why. If you've ever felt pressured to prove your love with money, if you've ever been told you owe someone because you're their mother, then stay with me. Because what happened next changed everything, not just for my daughter, but for me. And before we begin, if stories about strength, boundaries, and real-life lessons resonate with you, make sure you subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the day it started. My name is Alina Ellie Whitaker. I'm 66 years old. I was an accounting director for 32 years. I don't panic, I calculate. My late husband, Thomas Whitaker, used to joke that I could balance a checkbook during an earthquake. We built our life the slow way, carefully, quietly, brick by brick, and that brick house on Maple Ridge Drive. That wasn't just a property, it was our discipline in physical form. Thomas designed the structure himself. Civil engineer, always thinking long-term. I handled the numbers. No debt, no flashy risks, just steady growth. After he passed 6 years ago, the house became my anchor. And apparently, my daughter's assumption. Vanessa arrived that Tuesday afternoon in a white SUV that probably cost more per month than our first mortgage payment. My daughter, Vanessa Whitaker Cole, 32 years old, luxury event stylist, lifestyle content creator. She built fairy tales for other people's weddings and curated her own life online. Image was everything to her. Public perception equaled value. And lately, her wedding had become less about marriage and more about spectacle. She breezed into my kitchen like she always did, perfume first, conversation second. "Mom," she said, setting her phone on my counter, camera facing down but recording light blinking. She films constantly. "We need to talk numbers." Numbers, that's how you talk to an accountant. I poured her tea, chamomile. She never drinks it, but it keeps my hands busy. "How big are we talking?" I asked. She slid a glossy binder across my table. Inside, venue renderings, imported floral budgets, aerial drone packages, couture fittings in Paris. Total projected cost, $1.2 million. I didn't blink. "What's your portion?" I asked. She smiled. "Half. Caleb's investors are covering the other half, but Mom," and here it was, "this is generational. This is brand expansion. This wedding is a platform. Platform, not partnership." "Vanessa," I said carefully, "how much are you asking me for?" She met my eyes. "500,000. I nodded once. Silence. Then she added it. The sentence that changes a mother. "You owe me that much." The air shifted. Even now, I remember the hum of the refrigerator sounding louder. "Oh, you," I repeated. "You and Dad invested in your life. This is family equity. I'm just accelerating it." Accelerating it. That's what her fiancé, Caleb Cole, calls everything. Caleb, 34 years old, crypto investor, startup dreamer, always chasing the next digital wave. He joined us 10 minutes later. Smooth smile, perfect posture. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, "this isn't spending, it's positioning." Positioning. I've audited enough balance sheets to recognize rebranding of risk. He leaned forward. "Think of it as activating dormant capital." Dormant capital, that's what he called my home. Let me tell you something, especially to the women listening. When someone starts speaking about your life in financial jargon, pause. Because they've already converted your memories into numbers. I looked at my daughter. She wasn't angry. She wasn't emotional. She was certain. Certain that this was reasonable. Certain that I would comply. Thomas and I had always provided. Dance lessons, private college, that car she totaled at 19. We rarely said no, and here we were, the invoice for a lifetime of yes. "Mom," Vanessa pressed. "This is our moment. Public perception matters." I folded my hands. 500,000, I said slowly. "Yes." "And you believe I owe you?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." Caleb's eyes flickered, watching me, measuring. I stood, walked to the window. Looked at the maple tree Thomas planted the day Vanessa was born. Then I turned back, and I said it. "All right." Vanessa exhaled in relief so fast it almost sounded like laughter. "I knew you'd understand," she said, already reaching for her phone. Caleb smiled wider. "We'll structure it efficiently." Structure? Oh, Caleb, you should never assume an accountant doesn't understand structure. They left that evening celebrating. I remained at the kitchen table. And for the first time in 6 years, I opened the locked drawer in Thomas's old desk. Inside were documents most people don't know exist, private instruments, asset shields, quiet contingencies. Thomas believed in something he called future-proofing against human nature. I called Harold Bennett, our estate attorney, 72 years old, dry humor sharp as glass. When I told him what Vanessa asked for, he didn't gasp, he laughed once. "How much leverage does the fiancé believe he has?" he asked. "Enough," I replied. There was a pause. Then Harold said something that confirmed the unease I hadn't yet named. "Ellie, has anyone recently requested documentation on your property title?" My stomach tightened. Yes, Vanessa had asked for valuation records 2 months ago for wedding planning aesthetic alignment. Harold exhaled slowly. "Come to my office tomorrow." That night I walked through every room of my house. The hallway where Vanessa measured her height in pencil marks. The living room where Thomas proposed. The kitchen where we survived layoffs and lean years, and I realized something painful. The house had stopped being my home in my daughter's mind. It had become her future payout. The next morning, Harold laid out papers across his desk, property inquiries, financial pre-qualification checks, subtle but deliberate. "Caleb has been researching inheritance structures in marital states," Harold said evenly. I didn't react. "He's anticipating asset transition." Translation: he was counting my death before the wedding. I drove home in silence, sat in my driveway, and made the decision not out of anger, not out of revenge, but clarity. If my house had become leverage, I would remove the leverage. 3 days later, it was listed. Cash buyers only, no contingencies. Harold handled everything quietly. Vanessa was too busy posting venue tour to notice. Caleb was too busy forecasting crypto rebounds. The offer came in 72 hours, full asking. I accepted. I did not inform them. On the 7th day after I said, "All right," I signed the final papers and transferred every dollar into a protected instrument Thomas had created years ago, not liquid, not accessible, not impulsive. Then I packed 2 suitcases, left the keys on the kitchen counter, and drove away before sunrise. At 10:14 a.m., my phone rang. Vanessa, her voice was breathless. "Mom, why is there a sold sign in the yard?" I smiled slightly, because that question, that was the beginning of her education. But I didn't answer. Not yet, because some lessons cannot be explained. They have to be experienced. And what she discovered in the following weeks about leverage, about entitlement, about what inheritance truly means is something she never expected. But that story, it's only beginning. And when she finally learned why I sold the house, she stopped saying I owed her anything. Stay with me, because next is where the real numbers start to surface. At 10:14 a.m., my phone vibrated again. I let it ring twice before answering, not because I was afraid, because timing matters. "Mom," Vanessa's voice cracked through the speaker, thinner than usual, stripped of performance. "There's a sold sign in front of the house." "Yes," I said calmly, "there is." Silence, not the dramatic kind, the calculating kind. "What do you mean yes?" she asked. "You can't just sell it. We were in the middle of planning. As if my life had become a backdrop for her event schedule. "I told you I would handle the 500,000, I replied. "That's not what this looks like." I didn't correct her, because sometimes confusion is a doorway. Let me tell you something. When people believe they have secured access to something and you quietly remove it, you see their real character, not their curated version, their instinctive version. By noon, Vanessa and Caleb were in my driveway. Or what used to be my driveway. They didn't know I'd already left. The new owners had the keys. Vanessa called again. "Where are you?" she demanded. "Driving," I said. "Driving where?" "Away." That word unsettled her more than the sale. "Mom, stop being dramatic." I almost smiled. Women who make decisions are often labeled dramatic. Men who make decisions are called strategic. I chose not to debate terminology. "You asked me for 500,000, I said evenly. "I'm restructuring." Caleb's voice cut in, controlled but tight. "Mrs. Whitaker, with respect, this creates instability. Asset liquidation without family coordination." "I coordinated with my attorney," I interrupted. There it was. The first crack in his composure. 2 hours later, I was seated across from Harold Bennett in his office. He didn't ask how I felt. He asked, "Did they call?" "Yes. And they're unsettled." Harold nodded. Good. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside, confirmation of asset transfer. Every dollar from the house sale had moved into a protected trust structure Thomas and I created years ago. Irrevocable, shielded, timed. Caleb can't touch it, Harold said dryly. Neither can Vanessa, not now, not through marriage. Not through influence? Good, I replied, but that wasn't the full reason, and Harold knew it. You're not just protecting assets, he said quietly. No, you're protecting perspective. Yes, that was it. Vanessa arrived at Harold's office the next morning without an appointment. He let her in, because sometimes confrontation accelerates growth. She looked different without her camera, less polished, more human. Mom, she said, sitting down across from me, you humiliated us. Explain, I said. The venue coordinator saw the listing, people talk, it looks like you panicked. I held her gaze. Did you tell anyone I agreed to give you $500,000? Her silence answered me. Public perception mattered when it elevated her, not when it exposed risk. Caleb stepped forward. We were operating under the assumption the property would remain intact. Assumptions, Harold said mildly, are not legal guarantees. Caleb's jaw tightened. This affects long-term positioning. There's that word again, I said. Vanessa's voice trembled. Why would you do this? And here is where most mothers rush to explain, to comfort, to soften. I didn't. Because you said I owed you, she blinked. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. Let me pause here. For every woman listening, when someone tells you that you owe them your sacrifice, your labor, your lifetime, stop. Motherhood is not a debt contract. Vanessa's eyes filled. You could have just written the check. From what? I asked. The house is paid off. Was, I corrected. Caleb leaned in again. You've destabilized a significant equity position. Correct. And you don't think that affects your daughter's future? I looked at him carefully. I think entitlement affects her future far more. He didn't like that, but he also couldn't argue with it. That evening, Vanessa posted nothing. No venue previews, no dress fittings, no countdown graphics. Silence. Which for her was louder than scandal. Caleb, however, was busy. Harold informed me discreetly that someone had requested updated property ownership verification. It was no longer in my name. The inquiry stopped there. 2 days later, Vanessa came alone. No Caleb, no SUV, just her. She sat at my temporary rental kitchen table and whispered something she had never said before. I didn't think you'd ever say no. I didn't, I said. I said all right. She looked up. What does that even mean? It means I heard you. And I responded. That's not a response, Mom, that's a disappearance. No, I said gently, it's a boundary. Her phone buzzed, she ignored it. Probably Caleb, probably numbers, probably repositioning strategies. Where did the money go? She asked finally. Safe, for me, for me. That answer landed heavily. She wasn't used to hearing that. For you, she repeated. Yes, what about my wedding? What about your marriage? I countered. Silence again, different this time, less defensive, more uncertain. Vanessa stood slowly. You're punishing me. No, I said. I'm removing the illusion. Of what? That wealth is automatic. Her lips trembled. You don't trust Caleb. Trust, I said carefully, is not built on spreadsheets and projected valuations. She left without slamming the door, which told me something had shifted. That night I sat alone and thought about Thomas. About how he used to say, Ellie, we build systems not for when people are kind, but for when they're tempted. Temptation doesn't always look evil. Sometimes it looks ambitious. Sometimes it wears a tailored suit and talks about acceleration. 3 days later, Caleb requested a private meeting, without Vanessa, which told me everything. But what he proposed in that meeting confirmed I had sold the house at exactly the right time. And when Vanessa finds out what he tried to structure behind her back, the word, oh, will never leave her mouth again. Caleb requested to meet alone. That was my first confirmation that selling the house had disrupted more than wedding plans. Men like Caleb don't ask for private conversations unless they believe they can regain control inside them. We met at Harold Bennett's office, neutral territory. Caleb arrived 10 minutes early, suit pressed, expression composed, confidence rehearsed. He shook Harold's hand, then mine, and sat down like a man presenting an investment pitch. Mrs. Whitaker, he began smoothly, I think we can resolve this efficiently. Efficiently. The word almost amused me. Resolve what? I asked. The disruption caused by the liquidation, he said. Liquidation, not home, not history. Liquidation? He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printed projections, charts, forecast models, estimated appreciation curves. I didn't touch the folder immediately. What is this? I asked calmly. A joint family holding structure, Caleb said. If we reposition the capital from the house into a managed growth vehicle, we can multiply it significantly within 5 years. Crypto-backed real estate tokens, emerging tech funds, high acceleration potential. Harold adjusted his glasses and leaned back. Acceleration tends to increase risk exposure, he said mildly. Caleb smiled politely. Risk is misunderstood by conservative planners. I finally opened the folder. At the bottom of page 3 was the line that mattered. Proposed signatory authority, Caleb Cole, Vanessa Cole, Alina Whittaker, advisory. Advisory. I looked up slowly. Explain advisory. Caleb didn't flinch. You'd remain involved symbolically, but operational authority would need to be streamlined for efficiency. Streamlined, meaning removed, meaning irrelevant. Meaning signed out of my own capital. So your proposal, I said evenly, is that I transfer the proceeds from my home into an investment vehicle you control. Control is the wrong word, Caleb replied smoothly. Strategic management, Harold chuckled softly. Young man, I've been practicing law for 46 years. Control is exactly the right word. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly, but he recovered. With respect, this isn't about taking anything from you. It's about aligning family wealth for exponential growth. Aligning family wealth. I remembered something Thomas once told me. Ellie, he said years ago while reviewing blueprints at our kitchen table, if someone promises exponential growth, ask who absorbs exponential loss. I closed the folder gently. Caleb, I said, what would happen if your projections fail? He didn't hesitate. They won't. That was the moment I knew this wasn't ambition, it was arrogance disguised as innovation. And if they do, I pressed, a flicker, just a second. Markets fluctuate, he said carefully, but the long-term trajectory is unpredictable, Harold finished. Caleb's smile thinned. With respect, sir, old systems don't build generational wealth anymore. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, clarity. Thomas and I built generational wealth the old way, I said quietly. Discipline, ownership, patience. Caleb leaned forward. And Vanessa deserves to benefit from that. There it was again, deserve, benefit. Inheritance framed as entitlement. She will, I said calmly, but not through leverage. His expression changed, slightly sharper. I think you're misunderstanding my intentions. I think I understand them very well. Harold closed the folder. This meeting is concluded, he said. Caleb stood, smoothing his jacket. Vanessa believes in growth, he said almost warningly, and growth requires trust. I held his gaze. Trust is not built by asking a widow to sign away authority over her own assets. He left without shaking my hand. The office felt lighter when the door closed. Harold looked at me and raised one eyebrow. Well, he said dryly, that was bold. He's not reckless, I replied. He's strategic. So are you, Harold said. I hope you realize what you just prevented. I did. If I hadn't sold the house, if the asset were still sitting under my name, unprotected, accessible, emotionally attached, this proposal would have looked different. It would have been framed as temporary. Safe, collaborative, Vanessa would have encouraged it. I would have been pressured, and eventually I might have signed something under the illusion of unity. That night, Vanessa called, her voice sounded tired. Did Caleb meet with you? She asked. Yes, he said you were resistant to opportunity. I smiled slightly. Did he show you the signatory structure? Silence. Then, what structure, exactly? Vanessa, I said gently, did you know he proposed removing my operational authority? More silence. Thicker this time? That's not what he told me, she whispered. What did he tell you? That you were scared of modern growth. I exhaled slowly. Vanessa, growth without foundation collapses. She didn't respond immediately. I could hear traffic on her end, or maybe it was her breathing. He said we're thinking too small, she said finally. Are you? I asked. Or are you thinking too fast? That question lingered between us. Mom, she said quietly, why didn't you just tell me all this before selling the house? Because if I had, you would have defended him, I thought. Because you would have believed acceleration over caution. Because you needed to feel the ground shift under your own assumptions. But I said something simpler. Because sometimes understanding only comes after consequence. She didn't argue. That was new. Are you saying he was trying to take your money? She asked softly. I'm saying he was positioning himself to manage it. That's not the same thing, isn't it? Silence again, the kind that signals doubt entering a previously certain mind. Vanessa, I said carefully, when you asked me for $500,000, was it for your marriage or your image? The question landed hard. I could feel it through the phone. It's the same thing, she said weakly. Is it? I asked. Another pause, longer. You don't trust him, she said finally. Trust is earned slowly, I replied. Acceleration skips steps. She didn't defend him this time. She didn't accuse me either. What happens now? She asked quietly. I looked out the window of my rental home, smaller than the house on Maple Ridge. Quieter, simpler. Now, I said, we see who remains steady without leverage. And that is when the real fracture began, not between Caleb and me. Between Caleb and the illusion Vanessa had built around him. Because when she asks him about the authority clause, when she confronts him about control, he will answer. And the way he answers will tell her more than I ever could. Vanessa didn't call me for 2 days after our last conversation. For a woman who documents every hour of her life, silence is rarely accidental. I knew she was thinking, or confronting, or both. On the third evening, my phone lit up again. Her name. This time her voice didn't sound offended. It sounded unsettled. Mom, she said quietly, I asked Caleb about the authority clause. I didn't interrupt. Silence is powerful when someone is processing. He said it was standard, she continued. He said someone has to steer the vehicle. He said you don't understand high-growth strategy. And what did you say? I asked. There was a long pause. I asked him why I wasn't steering it. That question told me more than anything else. Doubt had entered the room. What did he say? I asked carefully. Vanessa exhaled. He said I don't have the technical background to manage digital assets, that he would protect both of us. Protect. Another word that disguises control. And how did that make you feel? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. I could hear her shifting, maybe pacing. Small, she admitted. That word hurt more than anything Caleb could have said to me directly. Vanessa, I said gently, when someone builds a future with you, you should feel expanded, not reduced. She swallowed audibly. He said you're destabilizing us, that your sale was emotional. I almost smiled. Emotional, the most common label used when women make firm decisions. Did he ask why I sold it? I asked. Yes. Did he ask what protections were in place? No, that was important, very important. Vanessa, I said calmly, when someone is truly interested in security, they ask about structure. When they're interested in access, they ask about availability. She was quiet. I looked at the document again, she said finally. The advisory designation. I waited. It basically removes you from any decision-making authority. Correct. And the liquidity clause, her voice trailed off. Yes. It allows him to move funds without unanimous consent if the strategic environment requires speed. Speed. There it was again, acceleration disguised as necessity. Did he explain that part? I asked. He said hesitation kills opportunity. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes briefly. Thomas used to say something very different. Measure twice, he'd whisper when cutting wood in the garage, because correction costs more than patience. Vanessa spoke again, her tone softer now. Mom, if you hadn't sold the house, could he have pressured you to sign? I didn't lie. Yes. Silence filled the line, heavy, real. He said, she continued slowly, that you're holding onto old systems because you're afraid of irrelevance. That one didn't sting, it clarified. Vanessa, I said evenly, security doesn't become obsolete. She didn't defend him this time, she didn't even try. He asked me something tonight, she said. What? He asked if I would convince you to reconsider. That was the pivot point. Not a suggestion, a test, and I asked. I said no. I allowed myself a small exhale. He didn't like that, she added. I wasn't surprised. Control requires compliance. Resistance disrupts control. Mom, she said carefully, I need to ask you something honestly. Go ahead. Did you sell the house because of him? That was the question she should have asked first. I sold the house because of what you said, I replied calmly. She didn't speak. You said I owed you, that this was family equity. When assets become expectations instead of gratitude, they stop being blessings. Her breathing grew heavier. You think I'm ungrateful? I think you were certain, I said gently. Certain that my life's work was already yours. Another long pause. I never thought about it that way, she whispered. That's why I needed you to feel the shift, I said. Without leverage, we see truth. She was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she said something I didn't expect. Caleb asked if you're planning to leave everything to charity. That made me open my eyes. And why would he ask that? He said you're unpredictable now. Interesting. Vanessa, I said calmly, what worries you more, that I sold the house, or that you no longer know what I plan to do with the money? That question hung between us. She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was raw. I think I've been planning my life around something that wasn't mine yet. That was the first honest sentence she'd spoken since this began. That's not a crime, I said softly. But building expectations around future inheritance is dangerous. It distorts judgment. She sniffed quietly. He said we could still make the wedding work if you release partial funds. Release, I repeated. That was his word. There it was again, language always reveals intention. And what do you think? I asked. She hesitated. I don't know anymore. That uncertainty was progress, not comfort, progress. Mom, she said, if I cancel the venue, we lose deposits. How much? I asked automatically, old habits. Almost 90,000. I didn't react outwardly, but inside I registered the scale. And how much have you and Caleb personally invested? Silence. Then quietly, not much. There it was, exposure. Vanessa, I said carefully, when two people build something together, the risk should be shared. She didn't argue. He said you're testing him, she added. I'm not testing him, I replied calmly. I'm observing him. Another long silence. If he loved me, she whispered, he wouldn't need access to you. That sentence changed everything. Doubt had turned into recognition. What are you going to do? I asked gently. She took a deep breath. I'm going to read every page myself. That was the first time she'd chosen scrutiny over spectacle. Good, I said. And Vanessa, yes, if someone truly values you, they won't rush you. She didn't respond immediately. Then softly, he hates that you sold the house. Why? Because he said it disrupted his 5-year forecast. 5-year forecast. Thomas used to say something about forecasts too. Plans are flexible, he'd say. Principles are not. Vanessa, I asked quietly, are you marrying a partner or an investment strategy? She didn't answer. But her silence was no longer defensive. It was reflective. Mom, she said finally, I think I need to see something clearly before I walk down an aisle. And that is when I knew the wedding wasn't the real issue. It was clarity. And clarity, once introduced, is difficult to suppress. What Vanessa uncovers in the next 48 hours won't just affect a venue. It will redefine her understanding of love, leverage, and loyalty. Because when she opens Caleb's financial projections again, she's going to notice something he didn't expect her to see. And that small detail will change the entire equation. Vanessa called me at 6:42 a.m. That alone told me something was wrong. My daughter does not wake before 8 unless a photographer requires sunrise lighting. Her voice wasn't panicked. It was controlled, which is far more serious. Mom, she said quietly, I found something. I sat at my small kitchen table, coffee untouched. Tell me. I reviewed Caleb's projections again, every page, every footnote. Good, that was growth. And, I asked. There's a line item under asset allocation, she continued. Projected inheritance liquidity event, year 3. I closed my eyes for a brief second. Explain the context. It estimates capital availability triggered by estate restructuring or mortality event. Mortality event. That was how he modeled my death, as a timeline variable. Vanessa, I said evenly, did he discuss that assumption with you? No, her voice trembled now. It's listed as moderate probability, moderate probability. I had survived breast cancer once at 58. I now understood how he was calculating risk exposure, not as a person, as a forecastable transition. There's more, she whispered. Go on. He adjusted the wedding expansion budget upward in year 4 based on increased liquidity. She stopped speaking after that. I didn't fill the silence. Some realizations need space to land. Mom, she said finally, he was building our future around your death. Not out of grief, not out of uncertainty, out of expectation. Yes, I replied quietly. She began crying, not dramatically, not theatrically. Soft, restrained crying, the kind that signals internal collapse. I asked him about it, she continued. And he said it was just modeling that investors prepare for every scenario. That it didn't mean anything. I leaned back in my chair. And did you believe him? I wanted to, she said honestly. But the numbers were too specific. He even calculated potential capital gains if the house appreciated further before transfer. I didn't speak for several seconds. When I did, my voice was steady. Vanessa, when someone places a timeline on your parents' mortality and ties it to wedding expansion, she finished the sentence for me. That's not love. No, it wasn't. It was leverage management. What did he say when you confronted him? I asked. He said you're overreacting, that all wealthy families plan around estate events. And what did you say? I asked him why he needed operational authority if it was just modeling. That question matters. He didn't answer directly, she admitted. He said leadership requires decisiveness. I almost smiled at the predictability. Leadership without consent is control, I said calmly. He accused you of manipulating me, she added softly, by selling the house. And what do you think? I asked, long pause. I think you removed his leverage. That was the moment the fog cleared, not completely, but enough. Vanessa, I said gently, did you ever notice how often he used the word accelerate? Yes. Acceleration feels exciting, but it skips steps. Foundations are built slowly for a reason. She sniffed quietly. I feel stupid. No, I corrected. You feel aware. Big difference. He said I'm letting you sabotage our expansion, she whispered. That if I truly believed in our partnership, I'd push you to reinstate liquidity. Reinstate liquidity. Interesting how love becomes conditional when access disappears. Vanessa, I said calmly, if your relationship depends on my capital, it is not stable. Silence, heavy then. He told me postponing the wedding would signal weakness publicly. There it was, image over integrity. What do you value more? I asked quietly. Your audience or your alignment? That question lingered. I don't know anymore, she admitted. Then it's time to decide. She exhaled slowly. Mom, did Dad ever plan around worst-case scenarios? That question softened me. Yes, I said, but he planned to protect. Not to access? I remembered Thomas at our dining table mapping contingencies, life insurance, trust instruments, asset shields. He planned for uncertainty to safeguard us, not to position himself advantageously. Caleb's projections didn't include one thing, Vanessa said. What's that? What if I say no? I allowed myself a small, private smile. What did he say when you said that? He asked if I was serious about building generational wealth. Of course he did. Vanessa, I said gently, generational wealth built on expectation collapses, wealth built on discipline endures. She was quiet. Then she asked something I hadn't expected. If I cancel the wedding, will you think I failed? That question broke my heart. No, I said firmly, I will think you chose clarity. Another pause. He told me if I walk away, I'll regret losing momentum. Momentum, not love. Momentum, and do you feel loved? I asked softly. That silence was different, not defensive, not confused, honest. I don't know, she whispered. That answer was the most truthful one she'd given in months. Then slow down, I said. Momentum without certainty leads to collapse. She took a deep breath. I told him I need space. And he said space kills growth. I almost laughed. Space reveals truth, I corrected. There was movement on her end, maybe pacing. Mom, if I end this, people will talk. They already are, I said calmly. The question is whether they're talking about a wedding or a pattern. She exhaled sharply. I built my brand on spectacle. Then build your life on substance, I replied. Silence again, but steadier. He asked if you're rewriting your will, she said suddenly. Interesting, I replied. And what did you tell him? I told him it's none of his business. That was growth, real growth. Mom, she said, if he modeled your mortality, what else did he model? That question signaled she was finally thinking independently. Probably contingency exits, I said evenly. Protection clauses, alternative investor paths. She swallowed. You think he'd leave if the money disappeared? Ask yourself that, I replied gently. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said it, I think I already know the answer. I didn't celebrate, I didn't gloat, I simply listened. I'm meeting him tonight, she said, to talk. Listen carefully, I advised, not to his charm. To his language? Okay. And Vanessa, yes. If someone views your mother's life as a line item, you need to reconsider what you're marrying. Her breathing steadied. I will, she hung up after that. And I sat there staring at my coffee long gone cold. Thomas used to say that structural cracks start small, invisible at first, but once you see them, you cannot unsee them. Tonight, Vanessa will confront not just a projection error, she will confront the difference between partnership and positioning. And when Caleb answers her question about the mortality model, the tone in his voice will decide everything. Vanessa didn't call me that night, she didn't text either. For a woman who once documented her coffee foam and sunset reflections, silence stretched loud and deliberate. I didn't reach out. Discipline sometimes means allowing outcomes to unfold without interference. At 7:18 the next morning, my phone rang, her name. I answered immediately, her voice was steady, too steady. It's over, she said, no greeting, no build-up. Just clarity, I didn't react. Tell me what happened, I said calmly. She inhaled slowly. I asked him about the mortality model again. I asked him why my mother's death had a projected liquidity timeline attached to our wedding expansion budget. I waited. He said I was being emotional, she continued. He said all sophisticated investors prepare for transition events. He said you're not a person in the model, you're a variable. A variable. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. Not even disguised anymore. And how did that make you feel? I asked. Replaceable, she whispered. That word cut deeper than anything else. He told me if I can't separate emotion from financial modeling, I'm not ready for high-level wealth strategy. I almost smiled at the predictability. And what did you say? I asked. She exhaled slowly. I told him my mother is not a transition event. Silence followed, not painful, resolute. He tried to pivot, she continued. He said I'm sabotaging our generational momentum, that postponing the wedding now would signal instability to investors. Investors. Again, always investors, never partnership. And what mattered more to him? I asked gently. Momentum, she said, not me. That was the shift, the illusion had cracked. I asked him something, she added. What? If my mother had nothing, no house, no trust, no inheritance, would you still be here? I didn't breathe for a second. What did he say? He hesitated. Hesitation is an answer. Then he said, that's not a realistic scenario. I let that settle, because sometimes avoidance says more than confession. I told him it is realistic now, Vanessa continued. You sold the house, the capital is protected, there's no immediate liquidity. And, I asked. He asked if you'd reconsider releasing partial funds for strategic reallocation. There it was. Even at the brink, access remained his focus. Vanessa, I said quietly, what did you feel in that moment? Small again, she said, like I was a bridge to something he wanted. I let the silence hold her realization. So I ended it, she said, no drama, no sobbing, just truth. What did he say when you did? I asked. He said I was choosing scarcity, thinking over abundance. I nearly laughed at the language. And what did you say? I said I'm choosing self-respect. That was the first time she sounded like a woman, not a brand. He told me I'll regret losing access to his network. Access, I repeated softly. Yes, she paused. Mom, I didn't cry. That surprised her. It didn't surprise me. Why do you think that is? I asked. Because I realized I was never marrying love, I was marrying projected lifestyle. There it was, the core truth. He packed his things, she continued. And before he left, he said something strange. What? He said, your mother outmaneuvered me. I exhaled slowly. Did she? Vanessa asked. I chose my words carefully. I removed leverage. What he did with that absence revealed him. She was quiet for a long moment. Mom, if you hadn't sold the house, he would have continued modeling access, I said calmly. And you might have mistaken acceleration for ambition. He told me you manipulated me, she added, by destabilizing the asset. Did you feel manipulated? I asked, long pause. No, she said. I felt forced to think. That was the difference. Manipulation pressures, clarity exposes. What happens now? I asked gently. She exhaled slowly. I cancel the venue, I lose the deposits. I absorb the consequences. There was strength in her tone, not victimhood, accountability. Are you afraid? I asked. Yes, she admitted, publicly and privately. That's normal, I said. Growth is uncomfortable. She was silent for a moment. Then she asked something that told me everything had shifted. Mom, if you hadn't sold the house, would I have seen this? I didn't hesitate. No, another silence. But this one felt lighter. Then you didn't ruin my wedding, she said softly. You prevented my mistake. That sentence settled inside me in a way I hadn't expected. For weeks, I had been the villain in her narrative, the destabilizer, the unpredictable widow. Now I was something else. Vanessa, I said gently, I didn't sell the house to punish you. I know. I sold it because when you said I owed you, I realized the house had stopped being memory and started being expectation. She inhaled quietly. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't rush to accept it. Apologies are meaningful when followed by change. What are you going to do next? I asked. I'm going to disappear for a while, she said. No posts, no curated resilience arc. I need to live something real before I package it. That was the healthiest thing she'd said in years. And the wedding? I asked. Cancelled, she said firmly. If I ever walk down an aisle, it will be because someone chooses me without calculating you. I felt a quiet pride rise inside me. Not loud, not triumphant, just steady. Mom, she said after a moment, I finally understand why you sold the house. I didn't speak. You didn't remove my future, she continued. You removed my shortcut. That was it. Exactly it. And shortcuts, she added softly, usually hide something. Yes, they do. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table in the smaller rental home and thought about Thomas. About how he used to say that structures fail when weight exceeds foundation. I had feared I was breaking something by selling that house. Instead, I had removed excess weight. But what Vanessa doesn't know yet, what she hasn't fully seen, is what Caleb tried to do 2 days before their breakup. Because Harold called me an hour after her call. And what he told me confirmed that selling the house wasn't just wise, it was necessary. An hour after Vanessa told me it was over, Harold Bennett called. His voice was calm, but I've known that man for 20 years. When his tone becomes extra measured, it means something serious happened. Ellie, he said, I need to confirm something before I proceed. Go ahead, I replied. You did not authorize anyone to request preliminary documentation on the Whitaker Trust this week, correct? My stomach didn't drop. It settled. Confirmation rarely feels dramatic, it feels cold. No, I said evenly. I authorized nothing. There was a pause on his end, papers shifting. 2 days ago, Harold continued, someone contacted my office claiming to represent a joint marital asset review connected to Vanessa's upcoming marriage. They requested structural summaries of your trust. Joint marital asset review, that phrasing wasn't accidental, it was positioning. Who made the request? I asked. Caleb Cole? I closed my eyes briefly, not in shock, in validation. And what exactly did he ask for? I said calmly. Liquidity triggers, succession timelines, contingency release clauses. In other words, he was looking for entry points, not sentimental access, structural vulnerabilities. Did he present written authorization? I asked. He claimed verbal family alignment, Harold said dryly. I asked for written consent from you. He said it would slow momentum. Momentum again, always urgency, always speed. What did you tell him? I asked. I told him I don't practice law at the pace of impatience. I almost smiled. Did he push? I asked. He attempted to imply you might lack capacity to fully understand digital asset integration. There it was. The pivot I had anticipated. When persuasion fails, undermine competence. And, I asked, I reminded him you spent 32 years as an accounting director managing 8-figure budgets. I nodded slightly. Good. Harold's tone softened slightly. Ellie, if the house were still in your name and unshielded, this would have escalated. I knew that. He was looking for timing windows, Harold continued. Specifically, clauses that would allow accelerated beneficiary access through marital integration. Translation, marriage first, authority second, liquidity third. Would he have succeeded? I asked. Eventually, Harold said carefully. If emotional pressure had been applied consistently and documentation was signed under relational influence, possibly. There it was, not theft, not force, influence. The the most sophisticated form of acquisition. Thank you, I said quietly. Ellie, Harold added, you made the right move. After we hung up, I sat very still, not angry, not shaken, just clear. Selling the house hadn't been dramatic, it had been preventative. Caleb didn't love Vanessa less because of money, but he loved leverage more, and that distinction matters. Vanessa called later that afternoon. Her voice sounded different now, not fragile, not performative, focused. Mom, she said, I need to tell you something before you hear it elsewhere. I appreciated that. Go ahead, I said. Caleb tried to convince me to call your attorney before we broke up. I didn't interrupt. He said if we presented a unified front, you'd reconsider releasing structured capital. He said your resistance was emotional instability triggered by grief. I let that settle. And what did you say? I asked. I said my mother's grief doesn't impair her judgment, it sharpened it. I closed my eyes for a second. That was my daughter, finally speaking from spine, not image. Did he mention contacting Harold directly? I asked. Yes, she said quietly. He told me he'd already reached out to understand the family capital timeline. I didn't know what that meant. Now you do, I said. There was silence between us, but this one wasn't strained. It was reflective. Mom, she said softly, if you hadn't sold the house, he would have kept pushing, I finished. And eventually I might have signed something under the illusion of supporting your future. He said you were hoarding wealth unnecessarily. I smiled faintly. And what do you think now? She didn't hesitate. I think you were protecting it from being misdirected. That word mattered. Not stolen, misdirected. Vanessa, I said gently, there is a difference between supporting your child and financing their acceleration. I know, she said quietly. I didn't see that before. You do now, she inhaled slowly. I keep replaying something, she said. What? When I asked him if he'd still be here without your money, she paused. He didn't say yes. That was the final confirmation. Not anger, not manipulation, absence. Mom, she said, he tried to frame your house sale as emotional sabotage. And what do you call it now? I asked. Boundary enforcement. I almost laughed softly. Good, he said you outmaneuvered him, she added. Did I? I asked. No, she replied after a moment. You removed the game. That was it, exactly it. Leverage only works if the asset remains accessible. Once I sold the house and secured the trust, there was nothing to maneuver around. No vulnerability, no emotional attachment to exploit. Mom, Vanessa said, her voice softer now, I was planning my future around something I hadn't earned. Yes, I said gently. And he was planning around something he hadn't secured. She exhaled slowly. I feel embarrassed. That's part of growth, I said. Embarrassment is awareness arriving late. She laughed quietly through her breath. You always say things like that. Because they're usually true. There was another pause, then she asked, are you changing your will? That question no longer sounded entitled. It sounded cautious. I'm refining it, I said calmly. Refining how? Ensuring that inheritance arrives with maturity conditions. She was quiet for a moment. That's fair, she said. That word mattered. Fair, not owed, not guaranteed. Fair. Mom, she added softly, thank you. For what? I asked. For selling the house. That was not a sentence I expected to hear. Why? Because if you hadn't, she said quietly, I might have married someone who saw you as a timeline. That was the true cost avoided. Not $500,000, not a venue deposit. A lifetime entanglement built on financial projection. Vanessa, I said gently, love should never require strategic positioning. She inhaled slowly. I know that now. After we hung up, I walked through my smaller rental home. It didn't hold decades of memories, but it held something else. Control, not over Vanessa, not over the future, over my boundaries. The house on Maple Ridge had been beautiful, but it had become leverage in someone else's forecast. By selling it, I removed the forecast entirely. And sometimes, the most powerful move a woman can make is not adding more, but subtracting access. Vanessa thinks the story ends here, with a canceled wedding and a protected trust. But there's one more conversation we need to have, because understanding why I sold the house isn't enough. She needs to understand what inheritance actually means, and that lesson is worth more than $500,000. Vanessa came to see me 3 weeks after the breakup. No camera, no engagement ring, no curated composure. Just my daughter sitting across from me at the small wooden table in my rental kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. She looked quieter, not defeated, just recalibrated. I canceled everything, she said. The venue, the vendors, the couture fitting. And the deposits? I asked calmly. Gone, she replied. $87,000. She didn't flinch when she said it. That told me something had changed. How do you feel? I asked. She exhaled slowly. Lighter and embarrassed and relieved. That's honest, I said. She nodded. Mom, I've been thinking about the word I used. I didn't need her to clarify. Oh, I asked gently. She swallowed. Yes. Silence settled between us, not tense, just real. When I said you owed me, she continued, I wasn't trying to hurt you. I know, I replied. You were certain. She nodded slowly. I built my entire adulthood assuming your success would eventually become my security. And now, I asked. Now I realize I was building on a timeline that wasn't mine. There it was, clarity without defensiveness. Vanessa, I said carefully, inheritance is not a payout, it's a responsibility transfer. She looked up at me. What does that mean? It means what your father and I built was never meant to replace your discipline, it was meant to support it. She absorbed that quietly. I thought generational wealth meant acceleration, she said. It means preservation, I corrected gently. Acceleration without foundation collapses. She smiled faintly. You and Dad always moved slowly. We moved deliberately, I said. I stood and walked to the small filing cabinet in the corner. When I returned, I placed a folder on the table in front of her. She looked at it cautiously. What's this? She asked. The updated estate structure, I said calmly. Her eyes widened slightly. You're showing me? Yes. She hesitated before opening it. That hesitation told me she no longer felt entitled. Inside were the revised documents Harold and I had finalized, trust protections, asset shields and new clauses. She read silently for several minutes, then she looked up. You added performance triggers? Yes. Business stability requirements? Yes. 5 consecutive years of independent income before distribution access. Correct. Her voice softened. And mentorship conditions? I nodded. Any capital transfer must be accompanied by financial literacy certification and independent advisory oversight. She closed the folder slowly. You don't trust me, she said quietly. I don't trust immaturity, I replied. That distinction matters. She absorbed that. And if I never meet the conditions? She asked. Then the trust fund structured scholarships in your father's name, I said calmly. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. Instead, she nodded. That's fair. There it was again, fair, not owed, not guaranteed, fair. Mom, she asked softly, did you ever plan to give me $500,000? I didn't answer immediately. I chose precision. Yes, I said finally. Eventually, her eyes filled slightly. But not because you demanded it, I continued. Because you demonstrated readiness. She blinked back tears, and I didn't. Not then, I said gently. She looked down at her hands. Caleb said you were hoarding opportunity. Caleb viewed opportunity as speed, I replied. Your father viewed opportunity as stewardship. I paused. There's a difference. She nodded slowly. When he modeled your death as a liquidity event, her voice cracked slightly. I realized something. What? I asked. He saw your life as timing. Silence settled around us. I don't, she added. That was the shift. Not just rejecting Caleb, reframing me. Vanessa, I said softly, selling the house wasn't about money. She looked up. Then what was it about? It was about removing the illusion that my life was a future transaction. Her breath caught slightly. You felt like that? Yes, I said simply, no accusation, just truth. She reached across the table slowly. I'm sorry, she whispered. I let her hand rest there. Apology accepted, I said. But growth is measured in change, she nodded. I've started something, she said after a moment. What? I'm rebuilding my business model, smaller weddings, real budgets. Financial transparency as part of the brand. I raised an eyebrow slightly. That's a pivot. Yes, she admitted, no more luxury illusion if it's not sustainable. That was new. And the public reaction? I asked. She shrugged faintly. Some followers left, others stayed. And how do you feel? I asked. Stable, she said. That word meant more to me than any follower count ever could. Mom, she added quietly, if I ever get married, I want it to be paid for by me. I felt something soften in my chest. That would make me proud, I said. And if I never inherit anything, she continued carefully, I'll still be okay. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. She was no longer building her future around my mortality. She was building it around her capability. Vanessa, I said gently, inheritance isn't money. She tilted her head slightly. Then what is it? It's mindset, discipline, boundary. I paused. You already received the most important part. She sat quietly, absorbing that. Dad would have done the same thing, wouldn't he? She asked softly. I smiled faintly. He would have sold it faster. She laughed through a tear. He always saw further than I did. He saw structure, I said, and he trusted me to enforce it. We sat there in the quiet for a long moment, no projections, no forecasts, no leverage, just clarity. Mom, she said finally, I understand now. Understand what? I asked. You didn't say all right because you agreed. She smiled faintly. You said it because you were already 10 steps ahead. I met her gaze calmly. I said all right because I heard you clearly. She nodded slowly. And when you sold the house, I removed the temptation. She leaned back in her chair, eyes steadier than they'd been in months. You didn't take anything from me, she said quietly. You protected me. That was the full circle, not drama, not revenge, protection. Vanessa, I said gently, sometimes love looks like subtraction. She smiled softly. And sometimes maturity starts with loss. Yes, it does. We didn't hug dramatically. We didn't cry endlessly. We simply sat in mutual understanding. The house on Maple Ridge was gone. The $500,000 was never written as a check. Caleb disappeared back into acceleration forecasts and digital speculation. But something else remained. My daughter no longer viewed my life as a timeline. And I no longer felt like a variable in someone else's model. That was worth more than any wedding spectacle. And if there's one thing I want every woman listening to remember, it's this. You do not owe your lifetime to anyone's acceleration. And sometimes the most powerful word you can say is all right.